Hi, I'm Ben Davis. I'm talking to you on the Cinepod Cinematography podcast.
The following podcast contains explicit language. You're listening to the Cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image and the people who make it happen. Coming to you from the world headquarters of Hot Rod Cameras in Hollywood, California, are your hosts, Ben Rock and Ilya Friedman.
Welcome back, Ben.
Where did I go? Where'd I go?
It's just been a week. We're back doing this again. It's been a week since we did it last. So
It feels like we never stopped.
well, the world has moved on. It's pushed on. A whole week has gone by. I know that that's part of the aging process. The time seems to fly by sooner. Not the same way as when you were 7, when it was a week before Christmas, and all you could do was watch the calendar.
I mean, honestly, between Halloween and New Year's, just seems like you blink and it's all over.
That's right.
And then enough of those go by and we all die of old age. It'll be great.
So, Ben, who is on the show today?
Well, it's an interview you did, and I'm extraordinarily jealous, with Ben Davis. And you're talking about the Banshees of Inisherin, which I have yet to see, but I cannot wait to see it.
It's a really good conversation. And yes, we talk about the Banshees quite a bit, but we also talk about some of the other stuff in his career, and what a career it is, of course, between all the various projects he's done. Of course, some of the biggest Marvel movies in there as well. But Ben Davis, he's a real get. I'm really glad that he was on the show, and what a charming and wonderfully nice gentleman. It was really great to chat with him.
Isn't it? I got to say, I feel like we chose to do a podcast about one of the nicest crafts. And I'm just really excited to talk to so many of these people.
Yeah, and we get into some of his older stuff too. We talk about from the early days, and I really enjoyed Banshees of Inisherin, which you can go see right now, and I would highly recommend that any of our listeners go see it in the theater. And you should go in not knowing anything more than you know already. And we try very hard in the interview to give nothing away. So yeah, go see the Banshees.
I'm pretty sure it's a sequel to the John Sayles movie, The Secret of Rowan Inish, right?
Definitely not. Oh. Absolutely not. Yeah, I see that smirk. You knew what you were doing. A joke there that fell flat. That really
if I got a dollar for every Rowan Inish joke that really lands, I would not have a dollar.
All right. So Ben, what are we talking about this week for our close focus? What's the topical news of the day?
Well, it was something you brought to my attention, and we've been, I would say, as a podcast, as a culture, we've been a little obsessed with the situation on Rust, the shooting of the cinematographer by Alec Baldwin, which was obviously an accident. I don't believe Alec Baldwin was trying to murder anybody, but there's been a new development in the story in that Alec Baldwin is suing the armorer.
That's true. The armorer and the first AD they're being sued by Alec Baldwin. And that's interesting because thankfully this sort of thing does not happen all the time, meaning people dying on set and of course being shot. But
almost never. We have the film industry has a much better record than like the meat packing industry or any number of other industries where accidents can happen.
But
I'm only going to go with meat packing.
Meat packing. Yeah, fine. We'll throw meat packing under the bus here. But I cannot recall a time when an actor / producer / star decided to sue the crew for negligence. And I think this is going to be something that we continue to follow because, local prosecutors are still reviewing the case and they're determining whether or not to file criminal charges and who those criminal charges will be filed against. And
can I just say something? If the stories that I've heard are correct, one of the stories being that the armorer was bringing live rounds so that she could do target practice between takes, she should be rotting in prison. But the set protocol, as I understand it, and I'm not anti-Alec Baldwin in any way, but the set protocol goes something like this. The armorer brings the weapon to the set and shows it to the first AD and shows it to the actor, and they both inspect it. And if he was handed a gun and was told it was a cold gun and he put it in his hand and pulled the trigger, then he, in my opinion, still is somewhat culpable. He did not follow the correct protocol. And Alec Baldwin isn't some 22-year-old who just started making movies last year. He's been making movies for, 30, 40 years.
And not the first movie he's been in with a gun.
Yeah. So all I can say is motherfucker knows the set protocol with a fucking gun, and he knows that it's his job to inspect it. It is part of his job. It's the AD's job. It's the armorer's job. It's all of their job.
And also to not actually point it at a living person when pulling the trigger, regardless, because we all know plenty of people who have been injured by firearms on set from having little bits of shrapnel of blanks flying out the barrel at 300 feet per second. It happens. It's like it's not the same as a bullet, but people get injured from these.
Well,
live...
there's a reason, and I bring this up every time we talk about this. When you're on set and you pull out a blank firing gun, which is just a gun,
which is a real gun. Everyone should understand that is a real gun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real gun. You're just putting blank rounds into it. When you pull that thing out, they put plywood up in front of the cameras. They hand out earplugs to everybody. There's a whole safety meeting about where everyone's supposed to stand.
This is the way it's supposed to happen.
And my general complaint and reason why I would say use airsoft guns and VFX muzzle flash is like every time you fire a gun on set, you've just kissed away 30 to 40 minutes of your day to safety.
Alec Baldwin's defense. Before we go down this path too far, because Ben, I know you will get on the soapbox, and I don't want to let you get on the soapbox.
I'm already on it. I'm standing on a soapbox right now.
So I'm knocking you off the soapbox.
Okay,
here's the thing. In Alec Baldwin's defense, he claims he never pulled the trigger. He says that the gun went off without him squeezing the trigger. And if it was a vintage firearm in particular, I've heard of this happening. This is not, it wouldn't be the first time. So maybe the gun was cocked, as it's possible something could have happened. Anyway, so
I'm going to get back on my soapbox a little bit to say, before he put the gun in his hand, he should have opened up the chamber and looked at what was in it.
That's true. That's 100% true.
All of them should have. The first AD, the armor, Alec Baldwin, everybody. And honestly, if the camera people who were setting up the shot, if they wanted to, they could look at the gun. When you're on a set, anyone on set in the presence of a gun is allowed to inspect it, because there is no limit to the safety that you need to take around guns. Yeah,
it's just so underlined too by the fact that so many of the crew walked off that morning. It's anyway. But let's not rehash. Let's not rehash all of this. We will definitely be continuing to follow the saga of Rust, and the New York Times has a whole article about Alec Baldwin suing the crew. If you guys want to take a look at it, we will put a link in the show notes over at Cam Noir, where you can read all about it. It just came out on Friday.
Awesome.
So Ben, let's get to the interview with Ben Davis.
Here we go.
The Cinematography Podcast Interview.
I'm joined now by cinematographer Ben Davis. Ben Davis, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You have got an incredible career, and I'm just going to highlight a couple of things for our listeners. And you've got a couple of movies out right now, too, and we'll get to those in a moment. But you shot the 2004 movie Layer Cake, which, of course, is famously known as the movie which put Daniel Craig on the map in the running to become the next James Bond. You've shot plenty of movies that have spawned sequels like Kick-Ass and Guardians of the Galaxy, plus whole other movies or streams of movies for like Marvel, like Avengers, Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel, Eternals, plenty of like big action Hollywood movies like The Kingsman, and most recently, My Policeman and Banshees of Inisherin. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've been busy.
Yeah, a little. You are prolific, and I know you come from an industry family. I know that your father was also in this business doing similar sort of thing. What were the chances of you somehow escaping this industry? What were the chances, you growing up and not following down this path? What made you decide that this was really the life that you wanted to have?
Well, to be honest, initially I didn't want to follow in my father's footsteps at all. But, and I sort of kind of funked out of school, and I was kind of messing around. I was a skateboarder. Now, there's a minute. I was a pro skateboarder. I was being paid to skateboard in the UK back in the 70s for a while. I kind of thought that I'd be doing that, kind of messed up my school, and then I was kind of playing around. My dad was in the States. I went to visit him. He was working on a film, and he said, look, come to the film set with me. You can help in some fashion. And interesting enough, as soon as I arrived on the film set, within a day or two, I kind of knew immediately that was what I wanted to do. No, I had to say, in my childhood, I spent, a lot of time. When I was skateboarding, I filmed, photographed skateboarding continually. I was always a very keen photographer and made my own little films and stuff as a youth. So it wasn't sort of like it came from nowhere, but it wasn't what I thought was going to be my career path at all.
Yeah, that's a pretty radical shift from professional skateboarder to cameraman. But, you know, as I was looking through your filmography on IMDb and the filmography of your father's, I didn't see a lot of jobs. Actually, I wasn't sure I saw any jobs where it looked like you apprenticed, like in the camera department, working as a loader or a second AC. So it made me wonder if nepotism didn't play an entire part in your getting into the business. It seems like you may have forged your own path. A lot of DPs I know that have children, they end up working related in the department in some capacity for a long period of time to apprentice and sort of learn the craft. But I didn't notice that with you.
No, I did apprenticing, but I didn't I was very angry with my dad. He'd left and gone to the States and I was living in the UK, so I didn't want to work with him. Also, we were divided by the Atlantic. So I came back from that experience with my dad and I thought, this is what I want to do. And I started to try and find work in the film industry. It was very difficult at the time because I had no qualifications. You needed a union ticket to work. I had no way of getting one. So my first jobs, I saw an advert in a paper for the National Film School. We're looking for actors, and I rang them up and I said, oh, look, I work in the camera department. By this time, I'd done 2 weeks on a film set. They said, oh, we're looking for people. We need people. They always needed people to volunteer there. So I went along and started working as a clapper loader on their films. Then I got a job at a camera rental house in the UK. I got my ticket. And then I qualified. Then I hooked up with my dad. We filmed the World Cup together in Mexico in 1986, and that was one of the few times I worked with my dad. And then the rest of it, my dad was doing his own thing. He was abroad, and I worked in the UK, and I kind of made my own way, made my own career. I did work up through the departments. I was a clapper loader and a focus puller. I wasn't a focus puller for very long. I don't think I was very good at focus pulling, to be honest, but I was a clapper loader for a while. I worked with some of the great DPs, with Douglas Slocombe, Billy Williams, Roger Deakins, Dick Pope. I AC'd for a lot of those guys. So, I mean, the initial exposure to the industry was through my father, but the growth through the industry from my first job wasn't with my father. No, he was on the other side of the Atlantic and I was in the UK. I always loved my dad, but we had a slightly difficult relationship.
You're not alone, and I'm not going to delve into my difficult relationship with my father, but yes, that's a recurring theme. Well, I think this is all very interesting. I know you've got 3 kids. Do you think the others will escape the industry? Do you think that they'll also be interested in this?
No, I've got 5 kids.
Oh, you've got 5 kids, excuse me.
I've got 2 kids from a previous marriage. Well, my oldest daughter is trying to be an actress, so she's sort of struggling away, trying to get work. The other 3 boys, no. And then there's Roman, who is my son, who's the actor. So, no, the others don't show any interest whatsoever. And would I encourage them to go into the industry? Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that anyone who's got a family in the industry, and is your spouse also a writer-director, if I recall correctly?
She is indeed. Yeah, she is indeed. Yeah,
so it's like, you're an industry family, but I think it's a little bit of mixed emotions when children decide to go into this path, because you know how incredibly hard it is. Even if you can kick open a couple of doors, it's like it is a hard grind. It mostly involves freelance work for a very long time, and is not necessarily conducive to always having the best interpersonal human relationships because of the hours and stresses and everything else.
It's very rewarding, and I do love my job, but it's brutal. It is a brutal industry. The hours. As I get older, I used to work film back to back. I go, right, next film back. I don't do that so much now. Now I have to take a little bit of time just to recharge physically, because they're pretty demanding.
Absolutely. I call it the work-life counterbalance, because I think the idea of work-life balance is a myth in this industry. I think you have to work really hard, and then you have to really not work very hard for a period of time, because the idea of being able to split your day is near impossible. So,
there's also an expectation, isn't there, on production? I mean, I do think that I like to think that post-COVID and with the world changing, that may change to some extent, but there is an expectation that if you're working on a movie or on a show, that they kind of own you 24/7. And I think, I'm hoping at one point that sort of expectation may change, and it's like, okay, well, there's no need, we're not saving lives here, we're making movies, and why are we working 14 hours a day and without breaks? Eventually change needs to happen.
Well, I hope you're right. And I know it's not exactly like it is in the US and the UK everywhere. I know it's a bit better in France. It's a fair bit worse in China. But it's like there is a collective complaint, I think, of people, particularly below the line, who have to work what is often insane hours for large corporations that can sometimes profit immensely off of the backs of that labor. It doesn't always work out that way, but it's an interesting business we've all found ourselves in one capacity or another. But let's change gears a little bit. So let's talk about you, Ben. Let's talk about okay. So I mentioned Layer Cake before, and Layer Cake, I think, is the movie that not only did it put Daniel Craig on the map for Barbara Broccoli and for others, but I think it also put you on the map too. I remember it being the first movie of yours that I saw. And can you talk about that movie as potentially a break for you? How that came about?
Yeah, it kind of was. I mean, I shot one sort of low-budget feature before, and I was shooting a lot of commercials. And I was well established in the commercial world. I was shooting some nice work, and there was just happened to be that someone gave my name to Matthew Vaughn and said, look, you should meet this guy. I know exactly who it was. He's a very good friend of mine called Simon Hayes, who's a Oscar-winning sound recordist, actually. But we knew each other since we were kids, and we'd worked together. And he worked on Lock, Stock and Snatch with Matthew and Guy. And he just gave Matthew and said, we'll meet this guy. He's good. And I went in, saw Matthew, and we kind of hit it off. And that was it, really. Layer Cake. It was Matthew's first directing movie. Mm-hmm. So it was a risk of his to bring me along as first, as a very, very sort of novice DP. Yeah, I look back at that film now and I see some naivety in my work, but it's interesting when you look at your early work, when you get later on in your career, and there's naivety in there and you think, oh, I didn't do that right. But there's also some stuff you look at and go, wow, because I didn't know any better, I did it that way, and actually it's quite good, So you think, there's a certain risk-taking. It's interesting to look at your early work. But, I'm proud of that film. If you look at the cast of that film, who Matthew cast, you've got, Sally Hawkins in a very early role. Ben Whishaw is in that. Tom Hardy. These are all people at the very beginning of their careers, who Sienna Miller, first role. They're all in very early roles.
It's an incredible cast.
Daniel wasn't a first role for Daniel by any means, but it was you look at the list of the cast and what they went on to do, it's quite incredible,
I'm reminded actually of something that Seamus McGarvey said to me in this podcast, actually, when I told him how much I really enjoyed High Fidelity, which was one of his, not his earliest feature, but one of his early ones. And he goes, oh, I'm afraid you like the runt of my litter, which I think is quite true, because, I think that cinematographers in particular really have a tendency to be quite self-critical and to think of how I would have approached this or how I would have done that, even though, as I said to him, for me, I think the movie is perfect as it is and I wouldn't change a thing. And I think it's the same with Layer Cake. Layer Cake wouldn't be the movie that it is if it was significantly different. But even though when you look back on it now with the eyes of experience, you think, wow, how could I have framed this differently? How could I have lit this differently? You think of all that just, as it comes through. Well, what's your thought then on sort of reviewing even more recent work? Do you do that with more recent work too? Do you look at that and go, maybe? No,
do you know what? No, I look at some of it and I think, I think you always look at your work and think, I could have done it better. But I don't ever look back with regret. I think I'm always nostalgic about it. It makes me smile. And I also think, some of it's quite brave, and maybe I've lost some of that bravery, maybe I'm too safe. Do you know what I remember more? The journey. I remember more than the film itself. I look back at it and I remember the making of the film and the time I had making it and the crew and the people I work with, because really the films, they come and go, but the journey's kind of what it's about now for me. So when I remember, there's a certain film which I hope we're not going to talk about, which is in my back catalogue somewhere, where it's probably one of the worst. It's probably the worst film I've ever made, and probably one of the worst films ever made. But I remember making it as being that we had the best fun on it. It was a wonderful crew. We had such a good time making it that it doesn't matter that it wasn't a great film, because I remember that. And the crew I know, who I still know now, we all remember it very fondly. But then they say, what about the film? And we all go, oh, yeah, well, let's not talk about that.
Well, I think this also brings up something interesting in that quite often on the day, you think you might be making something really, really fantastic. Everyone might be convinced that this is the best thing ever. And then you see it later and go, wow, was that really the movie that we made? And then I think also that you sometimes go like, this is not necessarily going to be the great thing. And then when you see it later, you go, oh my God, I am so proud of this movie that we made. It's like, you never know. The editing process is so incredibly important. And I think the idea of production of shooting out of sequence, which you really have to do in order to make any of your days or to do anything like that, and the way that you have to cheat the schedule makes it, I think, very, very haphazard necessarily for everyone to play it back in their head as at the end of the shoot or that, through post-production. Have you worked on movies that you really thought were going to be very poor, or maybe you had low expectations of, that then became incredible at the end, that you were so proud to be a part of?
Yes, there's been a couple.
You don't have to name them.
No, but there was one particular film that even when I saw it, I just went, oh dear. And it was hugely successful, massively successful. It made an enormous amount of money. And when I saw it, I remember sitting next to my wife and she said to me, oh dear, she said, you need to let me read your scripts before you agree to make them. She said that to me. And I'm not going to say what film it was.
Yeah, of course.
And then I watched it and I thought, and because she said that, I was watching, I thought, oh God. And it was a huge hit. So you never really know. I mean, I think if you're making something that's extraordinary, I think Yeah. I think you get an inkling that, this is good. Now, you can be disappointed in that. Now, sometimes that film will come out and for some reason you watch it and you go, it just doesn't work. And, if I knew what the magic ingredients were that it was going to work every time, I'd be a producer. I wouldn't be a DP. I'd be living in my mansion in Beverly Hills now as a very successful producer because I knew what the magic formula was. But I don't think that, sometimes you can make the scripts great, the acts great, all the ingredients are there and it just doesn't come together, It just doesn't.
Well, so jumping forward here, when you started Kick-Ass, did you have any idea that superhero movies were going to become such a big part of your future? Because before Kick-Ass, you didn't really have superhero movies. And after Kick-Ass, you have a lot of superhero movies. And I kind of looked at it as this sort of like dividing point maybe in your career too, because the budgets get much higher and it seems like the notoriety sort of shifts pretty quickly. I'm also including some other movies in there too that, Seven Psychopaths, of course, was a big hit, and Wrath of the Titans, of course, was well known. But Kick-Ass really seemed to be this like turning point, especially since it's sort of like a superhero movie. It's almost like a commentary on superhero movies. But then, of course, you go on to make a bunch of them. Can you talk a little bit about how Kick-Ass came to be?
Superhero movies.
Yeah.
Well, Kick-Ass, Matthew said, was one of those. I read the script and I thought, this is good. It was just a very clever script. I just love the concept. He goes, well, why can't anyone be a superhero? You just go and get a costume. And I really kind of, don't you just get a costume and do something stupid? But, and that's kind of what he does. And I just thought, this is great. But I didn't think that was going to, because I look at Kick-Ass now and I don't like the look of it now. I think we overcooked it in the oven. But no, I didn't think that was going to set me on a trajectory of comic book movies. I had no intention of doing comic book movies. And then Guardians came along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I went in to meet James Gunn and I read the script and I saw the artwork on the wall. There was a lot of artwork and concept work at that point. And I read it, and of all the Marvel movies I made, the script was done. It was perfect.
Yeah.
A lot of the Marvels, you come in and they're working on the script. And this is the working script, this is happening. But this script was done, dusted, signed off, shooting draft, and it was great. And it was kind of like completely out there for their films as well. It was like, it had a talking tree and raccoon in it with a machine gun. You know, it was like, oh, wow, this is there. And I just thought when I went through it and we started, it felt like we were doing something significant on that film. And I just got on really well with Marvel. You know, it kind of, you know, I liked them as filmmakers. They're filmmakers, you know, Kevin Feige, Victoria.
Victoria Alonso,
Yeah, they're filmmakers. They want to make good movies and they want to do it in the best way. And they treat you with a great deal of respect. And I like working for them. So I kept working for them.
It seems
they kept
mutual.
coming back.
Yeah. Well, Guardians, of course, was a massive hit, and it may be my favorite Marvel film of I think ever. It's really
I think it's my favorite Marvel film, and I'm obviously biased, but it's still my favorite because I think it's so unique. That's what I love about it. Yeah.
It definitely has a different feel. And boy, James Gunn, what a meteoric rise for him, too. Anyway, so Guardians comes along, and in pretty quick succession, you're given an Avengers movie, and then Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel. Was it just like they called you up one day and said, hey, we're getting the band back together. We're going to do this again. We're going to make another giant
Yeah, they
movie.
kind of ring me up, okay, and they say, look, we got these projects going on. Are you interested in any of them? And I'll always try to take the one that's really want to do one. I always want to do one where you're world building to an extent, so it's an origination, as opposed to obviously that's different with Avengers, Age of Ultron. But I always wanted to do the first of the series, so you get a chance to sort of, because I like that part of that aspect of the prep period of those is where you're deciding who the character is, what their world is that they're living in. So I'm always trying to take the ones that have an origination to them of something. So they come to me, and sometimes they come to me and say, was this one or this one? What are you interested in? Yeah, I've been very lucky with that.
Indeed. And I'd like to talk about Three Billboards, because that sits in there in the midst of all of those giant action Marvel superhero movies. And Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, of course, was a very highly praised movie. It's a wonderful movie. It's another collaboration with Martin McDonagh. And can you talk about how that movie came to be? How did you get involved with that? I mean,
I'd made Seven Psychopaths before that with Martin. Mm-hmm. So in fact, I spoke to Martin about In Bruges originally. And I couldn't do it. My wife was having a baby. He told me early, he said, I'm writing a script for Frances McDormand. I was a big Frances McDormand fan, so I was quite excited about that. And I told him that. And then he came to me with that film. And it's got one of the best and strongest female characters you'll ever could possibly want in a movie.
Agreed.
It was fantastic, you know. So I loved making that film. I think it's difficult for someone coming from outside and making a comment on American life and American sort of political culture or whatever. So that's obviously difficult. We stayed in Asheville in North Carolina. I don't know if you've ever been to Asheville. What a great town that is. Such a great city. So I really enjoyed my time there and working with Frances. I mean, I've made a lot of films now, as we're talking about now. I've been pretty busy. Most of my kicks I get now are from sitting on a dolly, looking through the lens, and then 3 feet in front of me, I have some of the best actors you could possibly see. And watching those people work is just a joy. And obviously Frances. I'll never forget the day when we filmed her where Frances comes into her house and the priest is there. And she does this sort of soliloquy about gangs. There's a scene we shot for that film that didn't make the cut, which was Sam Rockwell coming back from the bar drunk and getting into bed with his mum by mistake or something. It's just like, it's not in the film, but it was hysterical when we shot it. Absolutely hysterical. But I'll remember that moment. It's not in the film, but I remember making that movie with a lot of joy.
I think that the scenes that end up on the cutting room floor, and sometimes that end up on DVDs or, on the internet or something, is an interesting phenomenon, because clearly someone somewhere decided that it didn't further the story, it didn't further character development or whatever it might have been. But some of those scenes, like I've certainly worked on set for a long time, and some of those scenes are incredibly memorable that you feel like, ooh, this is an incredible scene. And to remove those out, there's got to be some pretty good reason for that. But do you have other recollections of scenes in particular that you thought, wow, this scene is going to be amazing, and then only to never have it see the light of day?
Oh, yeah. On every film, I think. I mean, on Banshees, we're talking about Banshees at the moment, there was a particular scene we shot where Colin, hungover, goes to visit his mother's and his father's graveside. And it was on this beach with this grass blowing, and then when we planted this grave, it's beautiful. I mean, it was stunning. We shot this wide shot with this silhouetted figure. It was, we had a lot of John Ford Western kind of reference points for the film, and it was kind of everything. It was a bit of Terrence Malick meets John Ford. It was beautiful. And when I saw the cut, I said, Martin, where's the graveyard scene? It's gone. Oh, it was heartbreaking, but it obviously didn't. The film was incredibly successful. It didn't service the film. In some way, it wasn't right. As a DP, you don't get involved in the editorial process. The last person you actually want in your edit is the DP. But that shot's beautiful. It should be in the film. The last thing you want. But it can be heartbreaking.
Well, we're going to get into Banshees in just a moment here, but I feel like I feel obligated. I have to bring up My Policeman, and My Policeman is something that anyone with Amazon Prime can go see right now. It's available on Amazon Prime, and it stars Harry Styles, who is, of course, a phenomenon in the musical world, and I think now also in the acting arena as well, based on reactions to his performance. Can you talk a little bit about My Policeman, how My Policeman came to be?
I'd worked on a film with Michael Grandage before. And he came to me with a script. I thought it was a beautiful script. And I thought the film had a lot to say. It's about a time that existed in England where it was illegal. You would go to prison for being gay. They would imprison you. And it wasn't that long ago. We're not talking that long ago. And I think it had a very important message to give. And I liked the way the film played over 2 time zones, and it was a joy to work on that film, an absolute joy. It's getting mixed reviews, I see. I personally like the film, and I can understand some of the negative things people say about it, but,
Yeah, I think
some
that Harry...
people love it.
Yeah, and I think Harry Styles is, his career is safe between, Don't Worry, Darling and My Policeman. It doesn't matter if the reviews are mixed. He's certainly going places. And
and you have to learn your trade. You can't just suddenly turn around. Acting is a profession, just
Absolutely.
like anyone else on the set. There is a certain skill set you need as an actor, and you have to get good at those skills. I'm always talking to my son about that. It's a real skill, and you have to learn that skill. And it was really interesting watching Harry work because he's learning, and as the film went on, he got better and better and better, and he's going to be a great actor. He already is a good actor. He's going to be a great actor. You've got to give him a bit of time,
I have no doubt. Yeah, I have no doubt. All right, so let's talk about...
We'll be seeing Harry in lots of movies.
Oh, we certainly will. Certainly if these two are any indication. So,
and I'm going to say he's a really lovely human being. I'll tell you that. One of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, I think, Harry.
Wow,
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Banshees of Inisherin. Let's get into this because I watched the movie yesterday. I loved it. And for people who aren't familiar with it, it just sort of came out right now. It doesn't have the PR push like a giant Marvel movie, but it's out there playing wide in theaters. I just saw it in Portland. And I don't want to give anything away because it's so much fun to not know the important details. But what I will say thematically is that I feel like the movie is about longing and mental health. I feel like it's longing, and of course on the most basic level, the male relationships where the friendship is unrequited on one side, and people have different levels of friendliness of how that relationship goes. How do you think I did in my description of the movie, and how would you describe it?
I think that's it's pretty good. I mean, the interesting thing about that film is that I have a lot of friends of mine whose opinions I really respect have seen it recently, and everyone comes away with something different. They all tell me a different thing. For me, the film is very similar to yours. For me, the film is about male conflict and about how men can't resolve conflict and never can, and how that's kind of reflected in the world we live in and what's going on in the world at the moment and what's going on at the time of the film on the mainland as the Civil War is going. So it's about that. I think it's quite significant that the only sort of sane voice is the strong female character in the film.
Very true. Yeah.
But it was interesting because I went along to the premiere, and I didn't make the premiere because I don't think I've ever made a premiere of any of my films because I've always been working. But I came off set and I went along to the drinks after my wife went. She came out in tears, floods of tears about how sad it was. But then other people were coming out laughing.
Yes.
And so everyone seems to take something very different away from the film, and there are no easy answers in it. And that's what I think is great about it, because there is an ambiguity about the ending, but there's also an ambiguity about... It's very interesting because men take a very different thing away from it than women do. That's what I'm beginning to notice.
Well, I will say that there has to be some intention behind the dark humor that pervades this movie. Did that humor come through on set? Because, it certainly came through in the audience last night in the theater.
Oh, the humor. It was very funny.
Yeah.
Some of the scenes are incredible. Some of them are incredibly heartbreaking.
Oh, of course.
To shoot, it was difficult to shoot on an emotional level. Some of the days, they weren't... it was a hard film to make physically, and I could go into that. But, on an emotional level, it was a difficult film, for the actors and for us to make, because some days would be very funny and happy-go-lucky, and other days would be like fucking devastating,
Heavy.
I remember one particular day, which was the last day of us filming, and it's the scene with Barry Keoghan. Without giving too much away again, there's a scene by a lakeside with Barry, who plays Dominic, and Siobhan. It was our last day of shooting, and I remember filming that. The last day of a shoot is always quite emotional anyway, but just filming that particular scene was incredibly heartbreaking. I think it's a beautiful film, and I'm glad that everyone takes something away from it. It's always different. Some people, it's so funny, and other people, God, it's so sad. It's like...
I think the best movies have some of both, though, and I think that this movie clearly has some of both. If you're paying attention, the humor is wonderful, and even though it's a period piece, and I feel like it's timeless though, because part of the story, giving nothing away, is that it takes place in a small community where everyone knows everyone else's business, and if you've ever lived in a smaller community, and I would even say that some places that maybe people work might feel very much like that, where everyone is sort of in everyone else's business, your interpersonal relationships become paramount. It becomes really critical how you get along, because you can't escape from some of the people who you're thrust upon when there are so few people, or you're in such a close environment that you can't get away from them. And this movie plays on that so well. It's not a huge cast. It doesn't have a cast of thousands. It's a very small cast. It's very intimate, and you feel like you get the relationships between these people. And if you were in that space, you couldn't avoid them. It'd be very difficult to avoid your neighbors. I love that aspect of this movie. I think that it's got a haunting soundtrack that's wonderful from Carter Burwell, who of course I know has worked with Martin before and has done some of my favorite scores. And I tell you that to have your images underlined with that incredible score throughout much of it, it's like, look, this is not a superhero movie. It's not filled with explosions. I'm assuming that you did actually shoot in Inisherin or something like that. Were you on location for all of that? I can't imagine that you were in a volume somewhere like The Mandalorian faking these vistas. So
not quite. Yeah. No, we shot on... Inisherin is a made-up name. We actually shot on Inishmore, which is one of the Aran Islands, and an island called Knuckle. So there were two islands which we created this fictional island of Inisherin from. It's all on location. There's no visual effects in the movie, apart from a bit of handwork here and there. But, it's all in camera. Yeah, that's what it was, yeah.
Let me ask you, is there just as much satisfaction from a well-composed, beautifully lit, natural light, time of day shot as there is a complicated sequence where you've got cameras flying and moving and stunts and everything going off at the same time? Is the quieter, more static, more contemplative frame and lighting equally as satisfying to you for your work?
possibly more satisfying, I would say. You know, you tend to, with those big sort of stunt or special effects sequences, you tend to get overrun with the technicality, and whereas the moments I spent a lot of my time just going off with a camera on my own and shooting aspects of the island at daybreak, and you know, I'd go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and shoot, and I'll always remember those moments as being something very special. So possibly more.
The light is spectacular. I mean, really, wherever you were shooting it, the light multiple times, like when you're these day exteriors and stuff, and some night exteriors, of course. But I'm thinking day exteriors predominantly. It's like, wow, what incredible vistas. So
we did build our sets. The three main sets are all kind of builds or partial builds. They're all they were all on the wild Atlantic coast. No one lives there, by the way. Yeah. There are no. When we went scouting, we thought we'll find these locations. We didn't find one of them because where we wanted our places to be, no one in their right mind would build a house because you're literally facing the Atlantic Ocean. There's nothing accidental in any of the visuals in that film. Everything was meticulously planned and was a long time in the making, that film. In the terms of planning to execution. No, we didn't shoot for a long time. I think we shot in 40-odd days, you know, but there was a lot of planning, a lot of thought went into every element.
Did you know immediately you wanted to do it the first time you read the script? Did this require any convincing whatsoever?
I didn't need to. I didn't even need to read the script. If Martin rings me up and says, I've got a film, I say, yeah, okay. I'll read the script later. I'll just call my agent and tell him I'm going to do it, and then I'll read the script. No, I knew I'd want to do it straight away. Yeah, there's that. Yeah. Usually I don't hear much from Martin for a while. He's very reclusive, Martin. You know, he only just got a mobile phone over the last year or so. He never normally, you know, he wanders around the world with his pad and a pencil writing, you know.
I admire that.
And then he has his theatre work, you know, that he's doing that a lot. But I read it. I was quite surprised by it when I read it because I know what I'm getting with Martin's script. I know it's going to have a humour to it, and I know it's going to be funny, and I know it's going to be lyrical and all those things. But I didn't accept anything quite so moving or quite so sad and tragedy-based. But I was pleasantly surprised by that because I like sad things. I like sad music. You know, I think there's room for that in our lives. I know we're all coming out of a pandemic and there's this need for, don't we want everything to be uplifting? Well, no, not necessarily.
Talk about taking the script though and turning the words on the page into images.
Well, it was quite easy on this one, to be honest, because Martin turned up with a whole film storyboarded. So all the pictures were there. He turned up with a stack of storyboards. Now, they're very simple line drawing, kind of stickmen kind of storyboards. You spend a lot of time actually deciphering exactly what they are. Looking there, go, what is that? Is that a donkey? No, is that a rabbit? No, it's a donkey. Oh, what's he doing? No, is that the back of it or the front? You know, a lot of time you spend trying to work it out. But he came with a vision of the film. And we looked at those, you know, we had to do 10 days locked down in quarantine in a house together before we could get on a scout because it was in the middle of the pandemic. And the storyboards were like his writing. There was, you know, I started to read and I thought, storyboards, let's go for them. And I realised pretty quickly the storyboards were like his language, just like his writing is. They were very unique, very lyrical, kind of funny shots through little doorway shots, close-ups of animals. They were very Martin. I don't know what happens in Martin's head because I read his scripts and I meet the man and I read the writing. Lovely, lovely man. I think, where does this darkness come from? But the storyboards were from that same soul and had the same... So that was pretty straightforward. You know, we worked a lot to those boards and they were very particular. And there's a lot of doorways and windows and very specific imagery, which for me was very John Ford, kind of Western kind of imagery. And, you know, what became very evident very quickly was that we would have to build these locations.
And you're building those sets on location. You're not building them in a
on the
soundstage
Atlantic
somewhere.
coast.
Yeah.
Yes. They were.
And those rock walls all had to be constructed then too.
They're all real, and the thatch roofs were real thatch. They were all real constructions. They weren't sort of polystyrene and the usual. Mm-hmm. There was none of that because they had to then stand up for like 6 months on the Atlantic shore, So they were proper constructions. Yeah.
Okay, we only have a little bit of time left here, and we're going to wrap it up pretty soon. But the color palette, you got to tell me a little bit about the color palette that you selected for this movie, because it's a period piece, and it definitely feels like a period piece, and all of the production design feels like period. But I have a feeling that quite often when people think period, they think dreary, or they think, muted, or they think Coral One filter, and you have none of that in this. It's delightful. It's wonderful.
It's like a modern take on an old fable in a way. Martin was very particular about that he did. I do not want dreary grey. I want the island to be like the island of my childhood. He spent his childhood, on those islands and in Connemara. He wanted that look. He had a book of, if you ever get a chance to look it up, John Hind is called, his Postcards of Ireland. Mm. And they're these saturated, really colourful, cliched kind of images of Ireland, but they're incredibly beautiful. And he had that there, and he'd sort of throw that on the table, and Mark and I would look at it with alarm. He doesn't want it to look... But he wasn't saying, I want my film to look like this. He was just saying, look, I want colour in my film. I don't want it to be dreary. So we spent a lot of time. That's challenging because on the island, you are blue skies, green fields, dark grey walls. There's not a lot of... So all the colour then has to be brought in the set design and in the costume. Costume design does a fantastic job with that. There's her yellow coat, her red coat, his jumpers. There's always these splashes of colour. Then you go into Colm's house and the interior is painted a Van Gogh yellow. All of these are very deliberate decisions that were made in the prep period.
Well, I have to give you compliments too then on color when it comes to your night exteriors, because some of your night exteriors, I think they're some of the most beautiful I've ever seen. There's a wonderful job of muting, and I don't know how much of it is in the grade, but I still felt like people were human. I could see their flesh tones, and I felt like these night exteriors were all just so gorgeous. Can you just talk a little bit about your approach to the night exteriors on the Banshees?
Well, the night exteriors were challenging, to say the least, because we couldn't get large equipment there. Normally, you put up a night exterior, you could put up a big softbox, spread light. We couldn't do that because there was the winds. I couldn't get cranes on the island, so everything had to be done with how high can I get a tower built, or can I? So I went back to very basic ideas of hard moonlight and trying to make it look as real as. I think the film could never look fairy tale-ish. I think that would have destroyed the film. It had to look very real. So I tried to get the moonlight. It could be beautiful, but it had to be real. So they were challenging. There's a particular scene where the two boys are sitting on a wall in the town. We shot. That was really hard because it was blowing a gale. I couldn't get any textiles up. It was hard light from a distance. And I just had to use... It went back to the way I used to work with a DP when I was younger called Douglas Slocombe, who was one of the great black and white DPs, fantastic DP. And he used to like black and white, and that's how he used to like it. It was hard light, pointed and shaped in a particular way. And I went back to his techniques. I'd put a hard light at a distance, I'd point it where I wanted, and then I'd flag it off things. And we went back to that, very much a sort of black and white night exterior lighting approach. Yeah, if you're looking up, Douglas Slocombe.
Oh, yes. So, famous for Indiana Jones and Rollerball.
Yes, if you look at, and if you look at the indie films that he lit, you'll see they lit with that hard light approach. It's about shadows and shapes. He was a kind of master at it.
How do you most like to shape your hard light? Is it if you can't use flags and rags?
I was going flags. I could get small flags up, but I was using also a thing called yashmaks we used to use, and nets. So yashmak is like a metallic kind of. It's not a hard solid flag. It'll give you so it's like a net, but better in the wind, if you see what I mean. So yashmaks and flags and doors, the barn doors on the lamps themselves we use. So
is it like a cellulorous, almost like cellular cucurloris?
Yeah, like a cucurloris, but different
metal.
than that. I'd have to show you a yash. Well, they're metal, so you can put them close to the lamp and get them right in without them melting, you know.
Yeah.
And they're like a fine mesh.
A mesh,
metal
yes.
mesh.
We call
and
those...
you can bend them, you can shape them. The thing is, the great thing about them, they're not a straight line. You can actually bend the edge of them to create a shape with them. And then we did the same on the interiors of the pub are all oil lamp lit. And we went for a very dark black ceiling and a dark green wall because I wanted to get this sort of Dutch 17th century painting kind of Renaissance look to it. So you'd put an oil lamp in there and then I would hide lots of little dados or small 300-watt lamps up in the ceilings, and then I would barn door and shake them off and light. So around it, say Brendan sitting around a table with like 5 other musicians and some other people. Each one of those may have their own individual key light, but all directed to look like it comes off the one central light source. So I went back to my roots kind of. I had very little modern control. It was very analog.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place for us to leave it. Ben,
right.
This has been so much fun. I'm really glad that you could spare an hour or so with us. And I really can't wait to have you back sometime in the future after your next
Perfect.
project. So
Thank you.
Actually, before we sign off, I know that people can find your work all over the place, but do you have a website or do you do the social media, the Instagrams? Do you do any of that stuff? Where could people find you if they wanted more Ben Davis in their life?
They can't. I don't. I used to do social media, and I don't do much social media anymore. I got a real, I don't know, I kind of went off social media with the whole QAnon thing and stuff. I just thought, maybe just don't do any of that. So I don't do social media, and I don't have a website. But
you're in good company.
You'll see my work at the cinema.
That's right.
I hope.
We'll put a nice link to Banshees of Inisherin on camnoir.com, which is our official website. And this was fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show.
My absolute. Can I leave a message for people out there? Please go to the cinema to see. Not to see anything, because I worry all these independent cinemas near me. They're really struggling.
Hear, hear.
Independent film is struggling. The big tent poles are great, and I have nothing against those because they're keeping the cinemas open. But, streaming is really affecting, since COVID, these places are struggling. And it's such a great experience. I don't want to lose cinemas from our lives because it would be a devastating loss.
Agree completely. And there's nothing quite like the cinema experience. And I hope all our listeners really are cinephiles and go out and support their local theater. So Ben, thanks again, and I look forward to the next time we get to chat.
My pleasure.
All right, so that was Ben Davis. That was so much fun. I'm glad all of you listening to the sound of my voice right now got to hear that interview. And any feedback on that interview, comments, critiques, send us an email or go to our website or, camnoir.com or our YouTube channel. I feel like that Ben Davis interview, we didn't really talk much in tech, but, he does get into a little tech at the end, which I thought was wonderful. But I'm really trying to have more interviews that are like that one. It was great. So
can I say something about talking tech? Because I don't know that anyone's ever complained that we don't talk enough tech on the show. But when we first talk to cinematographers, when we bring them on and we're kind of going through the normal housekeeping, we always say this is a show about art, craft, and philosophy. If tech figures into your story, feel free to talk about it, but we're not here to talk tech. And without exception, they're like, oh, thank God, I don't want to talk about the LUT that I put on the Sony Venice.
I'm going to disagree. I'd say there are a couple of exceptions of people who wanted to talk some tech, and they still did, and it was fine.
Well, if we have someone on explicitly for tech reasons, that's one thing. But most cinematographers don't want to talk about like the debayer process on the CMOS sensor that they use. They don't care.
And for me, I do that Monday through Friday. So I'm just glad to actually have some time when I don't have to talk about that, which is wonderful.
Very cool.
And now, short ends.
So Ben, it is our short end time of the show. What is your obsession this week? What are you into?
Well, I think that this is a replay for me, but the first time I talked about it was I had just heard about it, and now I have seen it, and it is weird the Al Yankovic story, which, if you are listening to the sound of my voice, turn this podcast off and go watch this movie. It is
Wait, you're telling people to stop listening to us right now to go watch? Couldn't they wait till the podcast is over?
That's true. It's probably only 5 more minutes, so maybe 10.
That's true.
It is just pure joy. It is so funny. And I think it's directed by Eric Appel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. It might be Appel. And I should also point out, shot by Ross Riege.
Okay.
I hope I got your name right, Ross. You did an amazing job.
Ross, you did a great job. Yeah, I saw it too. It looks great. Well done.
It looks amazing. It is so funny, and it reminds those of us who were awkward tweens at one time and were the weird kid in our class who loved Weird Al that we were actually right. We were correct.
We were right to like Weird Al.
Weird Al, what he did was kind of like a weird kind of novelty thing. There's a great podcast that Slate does called Hit Parade, and they did a whole thing about novelty music, and probably 2/3 of it was talking about Weird Al Yankovic because of what he's been able to do. But holy crap, he has now done to the musical biopic what his music does to other music. And you might say Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story did that. Like there have been other parodies of the musical biopic. Few were as insane as this one. Like for a while there, you're like, okay, they're sort of quasi sticking to the story and playing with it. And then it just flies completely off the rails of reality. It's about the time that he and Madonna start shacking up, which happens in it. And I mean...
And Evan Rachel Wood as Madonna is just awesome.
That's what I was going to say.
She nails it.
Yeah, there's a party scene in the movie where you've got
it's Spot the celebrity. It's Spot the actor. It's like
it's like Pee Wee Herman and Andy Warhol, and like Dr. Demento obviously was there because he's a huge character in it. But it was like one after another, and they were all played by huge actors brilliantly.
Andy Warhol is Conan O'Brien, who I was just like I loved. I thought it was great, and there's so much stuff of that all through the movie. Like, cameos.
Patton Oswalt is an amazing heckler.
He's great.
Like the first time Weird Al takes the stage and isn't sure of himself, and then he wins over Patton Oswalt's like angry trucker guy. And I mean, to me, it's a reminder of just what a national treasure Weird Al is, and how he's basically taken a shtick that he did that really could have been like a flash in the pan, like
absolutely
could have been the one-eyed one horse.
Someone under the bus, but yeah, he could have absolutely been like I remember that guy, and that would have been it.
Oh, I was going to say one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. By the way, did
that's
you
exactly where I was going to?
Do you know actually that guy's other claim to fame?
No,
that person made the Wilhelm scream.
Really? Same person?
The same guy who sang one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater
was the actor who did the Wilhelm scream?
Correct.
Whoa, I didn't know that. That's great.
Yeah, little side trip there.
Wait a second. For anyone who doesn't know what the Wilhelm scream is, Ben Katz, if you could insert that right now, just so everyone knows that it's the most overused scream in cinema history.
Yeah, I went through a period of time where I incorporated the Wilhelm scream into my stuff, and then after a while I'm like, it's kind of a hack thing to do now.
It is totally a hack thing. But yeah, you'll find them in Quentin Tarantino movies and Star Wars movies. And
all the Star Wars movies, all the Indiana Jones movies. Like if you go on YouTube and do a search for Wilhelm scream, there are people who've put together compilations of Wilhelm scream in everything. And we're talking like it's a scream that was done, I think, for like Gunsmoke or something like that in the 1950s.
It's even older than that, yeah. And actually, there's an episode of a podcast called 20,000 Hertz, and I'm going to ask Alana Cody to put a link to the Wilhelm scream episode of 20,000 Hertz. If you haven't heard it, it's a short, wonderful little podcast documentary all about the Wilhelm scream, and you can get the full story.
And by the way, in that very episode, they have takes of the Wilhelm scream.
That's right.
There's more than one take that he did.
And you get to hear like how clearly that particular scream was the one to go with.
You know, not to stay on the Wilhelm scream thing any longer, but why is it
to stay on the Wilhelm scream a little bit longer?
Why do they call it the Wilhelm scream? There's the guy who
the character in the original movie. I don't remember what the movie was now, but the character, they said his name was Wilhelm, and so that's where it came from.
Sure thing.
But it turns out it wasn't actually Wilhelm.
So in summary, Weird the Al Yankovic story is awesome. Ilya, what's your short end this week?
All right. So I have to mention that there's a service out there which tracks podcasts. And if you have a podcast like we do and you register with them, they will give you updates as to where you rank in your particular genre in different countries around the world. This is not exactly my short end. My short end is coming up right after this. This is preface. So here's the thing. According to Chartable, the free version, which we use to see how we're doing around the world, actually gave us some pretty interesting information. And I found out in various countries where we continue to be downloaded and people are listening to us, even though we don't speak the native tongue of many of these other countries, we actually have done pretty well. According to Chartable and the Apple Podcast platform, in different countries, in the TV and film genre, which is very competitive, it's probably the most competitive. You'll find other podcasts kind of like ours that go into arts and entertainment or other things because it's not so competitive. But TV and film, we're competing with like the official podcasts for like Game of Thrones and stuff like that. But we've done really, really well. And like, for example, in Indonesia, we peaked at number 4. We were number 4. We weren't quite, we were in the top 10 of many countries, though, not just Indonesia. Ireland, number 5, which I think is totally appropriate for the Banshees of Inisherin. We peaked at number 5 at some point, and we've been on their charts as recently as this past week. So all of our recent episodes seem to be doing well there. Israel, we reached number 6. Whoa. Italy, number 5.
Whoa.
The Netherlands, number 9.
Holy crap.
South Africa, number 4.
What?
In fact, Hong Kong, number 9. Great Britain's a little more competitive. We peaked at 28, not quite as high. France, very competitive. We peaked at 31. But Estonia, number 2, and number 1 for the Cinematography podcast, Colombia.
What?
I know. Yeah, we hit number 1 at some point in Colombia. We were the number 1 downloaded podcast in the TV and film genre, which is probably, like 1 million podcasts or something like that. So, I have to do a shout out to what my short end is here, is very much related to Poland. We reached number 8 in Poland. And of course, in Poland right now is the Camera Image Film Festival. And it is not the only, but it is certainly the most prominent film festival in the world for the cinematographer. And the Camera Image Festival themselves, and you'll hear people say Camera Image, it's the pretentious way to say it, and
it's
with
like
good
people
reason.
who say it's like people who say the Cannes Film Festival when it's actually pronounced Cannes.
Yeah. So anyway, Camera Image in Poland, turns out the festival has gotten some money together and they're building a massive film center. And I got to say that their ethos really resonates with me, because one of the things that I always really was hoping to do with this podcast was to try to elevate the perception of the cinematographer as an artist. And it isn't always the case. And it's interesting because at the opening remarks of the Camera Image Film Festival this week for 2022, the festival director basically made the same sort of statement that it's not always, the position is not always given the same level of authorship all over the world. But I found out in Poland, cinematographers do receive residuals. And that's like one of the, the big things.
I will never understand why they don't get it here. I'll never understand why the crafts that don't get residuals are, like that actors who are in a loop group who work on a movie for under 6 hours, they get residuals.
And by loop group, you mean someone who went in and looped some dialogue?
Yeah, it's like, hey, we need a crowd of people in the background, so just scream a bunch of stuff. Oh, we need someone on the other side of this phone call, so you're going to be that voice. Somebody who works on the movie for literally under 5-6 hours, they get residuals because it's a SAG thing. But the editor, the cinematographer, the production designer, wardrobe designer, VFX supervisor, the people who really who guide the vision, none of them get residuals, just the writer and the director. And it's because of the way the unions are set up. Anyway, I'll get off of that soapbox. But
not in Poland, though. In Poland, some of these crafts and these key people do get, residuals, authorship dollars that comes back to them, including the cinematographer.
As well they should.
As well they should. And I would love very much for that to change elsewhere, too, because let me tell you, I'm taking nothing away from any of the other crafts and any of the other departments. Being the cinematographer on a small production, on a medium production, or on a large production is a very, very difficult job. It is nothing to sneeze at. And I'm not going to belabor this point here, but absolutely, it's tough work. And the fact that people get the incredible images that they do, they deserve some extra love. So
well,
anyway,
look, there are directors who are visionaries and brilliant, and they know how to do everything. And they completely visualize it themselves. And there are also directors who are great but don't specialize in the visual side. Their thing is working with actors, and cinematographers come in and they make the movie into the movie. And as a director, I've been lucky to work with some just awesome DPs over the years. And I can tell you that every single one of them has saved my ass multiple times.
I was going to say that also anyone out there who is a first-time director, you don't want to have a first-time DP. You need your cinematographer because they're going to help you in innumerable ways make sure that you get your days done and your
They're going to save your ass. At every turn, they're going to save your ass. And they're going to make sure, people don't even talk about this very much. We talk about it on the show sometimes, but it's like when you're working with a really good DP, you know for a fact that whatever they shoot will cut together. It will cut. And when you work with someone who's not good, they will assure you that it will cut together, and then it does not.
It does not. And that's really heartbreaking to be in edit and then having to be in triage mode to figure out how you're going to save a scene because shot A and B. God, when I say cinematography, I'm speaking specifically of movies and or possibly even of television, people who are working in narrative, but I see it in all different sorts of things, including things that people lump into the cinematography category, which is probably incorrect, like live events, where live event shots A and B don't cut together. And granted, there is a person whose job it is, the technical director, to make sure that these cuts line up, and people who are shooting plays and all kinds of other stuff, but they don't necessarily have the ability to make sure that camera A and camera B are matching the way that they should so that those shots work. And that discipline and that skill set is hard won. It's hard won from a life of putting it together. So when there's people out there who are fresh off the boat and they say, hey, I'm going to be a cinematographer, I'm going to be a DP, I'm going to be in charge of this now, I always think to myself that's very bold step, and that it's wonderful that you can convince someone else to pick up the tab for your learning process here. But it is you have a huge responsibility and weight on your shoulders to make sure that the editor can actually do their job at the end of the day.
And you should get a goddamn residual for it.
That's right. And you should. So, hey, Ben, I think that just about does it for this show this week. Where can people find you?
Number one place to find me is to subscribe to Audible and check out my new series Catchers, which is doing pretty well.
They can find you on Audible?
Yeah, they can find my work there.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to pay for Audible, email me and I'll get you a code. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Neptune Salad if Twitter's still around. I've recently started experimenting with Mastodon, which is sort of like Twitter if there were 25 people on it.
If there was no Elon Musk.
Yeah. No, Mastodon's pretty cool, actually. But go to benrock.com. But please check out Catchers. That's what I'm here to say. Catchers. Please listen to Catchers. Don't feel like you have to pay for Catchers. Reach out to me. I'll get you a code. How about yourself, Illy? Where can people find you?
They can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras. Hot Rod Cameras, the sponsor of this program. I read something yesterday. Someone on a very popular blog talked about finding an aperture light. Never heard of it before, but they heard about it on our podcast.
Oh, cool.
They're telling everyone how great the light was and how they owned 5 of them and how they went to some giant online retailer to buy them. And I was like, you could have just shopped at Hot Rod Cameras. You could have bought it from... Yeah, and you didn't have to, sell out.
It's the easiest way to support this podcast is
it's pretty easy.
If you need lighting or camera equipment and you're going to buy it anyway, buy it from Hot Rod Cameras.
Yes, absolutely. So I was pleased to see that, our advertising was working and we were influencing and molding young minds. But unfortunately, they failed at the end. I won't call the person out on this show, but I'm thinking about sending them an email saying like, hey, come on.
Hey, yo.
But then I saw that they put like affiliate links down too, so like they could make money by getting other people to buy the light. So there's always that. Anyway, so you can find me over at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com. Ben, who should we thank this week?
Let's thank Alana Cody, whose work pile is ramping up as we go into Oscar season.
Oh, yeah. A big stack of screeners arrived today.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that today's interviewee, Ben, is definitely going to be one of those considered for Best Cinematography.
Undoubtedly.
We should thank Ben Katz, our hardworking, intrepid editor who makes us sound like not idiots. I don't know what he's going to do with the 47 rabbit holes we went down tonight.
Yeah, not idiot's going to be tough. Yeah. Idiot might leak through a little bit.
I'm okay with that. I'll accept it. And last but never least, we should thank Kay Zalatrakshy, who composed every scrap of music that you've heard on the show. Go to musicbykays.com. Check out his work. Send him any message, for fuck's sake. Just send him a message.
Or, previously worn underwear. Anything you want.
For real. Anything at all. But just let Kays know that you heard his work on here. He actually, I was talking to him the other day, and he said he wants to make some new music for us. So we have to
Yeah, let's get on that.
Let's do that. So that about wraps it up, though. Ilya, you want to take us out?
Thanks for listening.
This has been the Cinematography Podcast, presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory on the web at hotrodcameras.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on iTunes and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.